Welcome to the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island, some of the most captivating neighborhoods in all of Manhattan, containing the most amount of museums within the city. It's famous for its rich history and streets that have become iconic to New York City's glamorous image. Streets like Madison, Park, and Fifth Avenue, which transformed the neighborhood into a luxurious playground. I'm Jose, and I invite you on an amazing adventure to experience the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island. On this tour, we'll journey to the Museum Mile, the long stretch of museums laid out in Fifth Avenue. We'll learn about the architecture of the neighborhood, which contains some of the wealthiest zip codes anywhere in America. And we'll explore the island that sits along the East River and contains a unique tram that connects to the borough of Queens. So let's go on tour and explore the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The New York Metro system, one of the most convenient and sophisticated layouts around the world. We begin our adventure by escalator, going down into the 96th Street station at the edge of the Upper East Side in the neighborhood of Yorkville. This station opened in 1904 as one of the original 28 lines that kicked off the New York train service. On this empty train wagon, I take the subway to the other end of the neighborhood, which connects me to one of Manhattan's islands. The Upper East Side, the neighborhood adjacent to the Upper West Side that sits between Central Park and Roosevelt Island. The Upper East Side was mostly farmland, becoming a market district containing the Boston Post Road. This road was a small delivery route that extended between Boston and New York City. Sylvan's Terrace in Washington Heights is one of the few areas that still contain that history. When the New York and Harlem Railroad extended to the area, Upper East Side saw its commercial development blossom around the first station in its sub-neighborhood of Yorkville, one of the earliest German enclaves in America. With the beautiful overlook of the East River and the stunning Central Park, famous American titans built mansions along Fifth Avenue, including the famed Andrew Carnegie from Pittsburgh, the Rockefeller family, and the Kennedys. It molded this exuberant neighborhood into the affluent streets we see today. Between Queens and Manhattan is Roosevelt Island, a small island that once housed New York's inmates. It was later converted to an island of rehabilitation, containing several medical facilities, and finally a residential zone during the 20th century. Roosevelt Island debuted America's first aerial tram in the 1970s, helping the residents of Queens and Manhattan connect to the island. And right into our tour, we catch the Roosevelt Island tram descending. Roosevelt Island has a singular bridge that connects to Queens, and then the tram connects to Manhattan, bridging the gaps of transportation. Roosevelt Island is one of 7 islands that belong to the borough, and one of 4 that settles along the East River. At the tram terminal, we see a mix of residents commuting and tourists checking off a bucket list item. For a regular metro fare, I enter the tram, ready to get some of the best views of the Upper East Side. The Roosevelt Island tram was the first tram across America to be used for urban transportation. And since 1976, the tram receives over 6,000 commuters a day, getting this beautiful view of the city. As the tram elevates, we glide next to the Queensboro Bridge, a toll-free bridge that opened in 1909, connecting the neighborhoods of Long Island City and the Upper East Side. And the bridge is a 2-level vehicular bridge that receives up to 160,000 vehicles on a daily basis. At this height of 250 feet above water, I look out into the Upper East Side, and its long stretch of famous streets and buildings. As the tram begins to slowly descend, you can see the busy Manhattan traffic that bottlenecks at the exit of the Queensboro Bridge on 59th Street. And our tram ride reaches its landing point on the Upper East Side, with the next wave of passengers patiently observing this iconic form of New York City travel. Before we visit the Upper East Side, let's head back to Roosevelt Island to explore a hidden history of New York's past.
What are the odds I find both trams here? Amazing views from Roosevelt Island.
No matter where you look on the island, you're treated with delightful views of Manhattan and Queens, with ships going up and down the river. And I head back to the visitor center to board the Roosevelt Island Red Bus. This is a toll-free bus that takes us around the island. We see travelers settle on the bus, and I grab a window seat to take in the fantastic views. The bus ride is a short loop around, as Roosevelt Island is only 2.5 kilometers long. You can walk around the whole island in a span of an hour and 20 minutes. And from this window seat, you see the magnificent Queensboro Bridge. Before it became a residential neighborhood, Roosevelt Island once had an insane asylum and a penitentiary similar to the infamous Rikers Island. The institutions saw a decline and eventually were abandoned, leading to the redevelopment of the island in the mid to late 1900s. From here, I observe the faraway traffic on the FDR in Manhattan, and I'm surprised by how much quieter it is on this part of the city.
With modern medicine, we've cured illnesses that have plagued our ancestors, debilitating diseases that made life expectancy much shorter during the early days of immigration. One of those illnesses was smallpox, a deadly disease where 3 out of 10 people who contracted the illness would pass, and those who survived it were left with scars. This hospital was the very first hospital to treat patients with smallpox and conduct research to cure the illness.
In the short span of human history, the world has seen some truly devastating illnesses. Smallpox has accounted for the death of over 500 million people. This hospital goes hand in hand with New York's immigration. It operated during the peak of immigrants entering Ellis Island, being used to contain and quarantine smallpox as it ravaged through New York City. The remains of the hospital bring curious observers to look back at the haunting history of immigration. This segment of the island is the eerie reminder of the fragility of humans and how quickly a minor illness can spread across the planet. As we walk further to the island's southern point, we come across the Four Freedoms Park and a memorial to the president. Throughout New York State, you'll find monuments dedicated to one of its most famous sons, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the longest-serving president and also the 48th governor of the state of New York. The Four Freedoms Park is dedicated to the president and his 1941 State of the Union address.
But one of the things that made FDR a tragic leader was his battle with polio. During his later years, FDR was wheelchair bound, an illness that he kept hidden from the public to suppress the image of looking weak and sickly. In this memorial, FDR extends his hand to a young girl with crutches. It's a symbol of hope to honor those with a disability. The water's subtle splash takes us back to reality from this emotional piece of the island. And the few sounds of the passing boat keeps the reminder of New York on the sidelines. The Four Freedoms Park are transcripts taken from the President's State of the Union address, stating that everywhere in the world, people deserve the right to freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. This beautiful park began its design in the late 1970s and wasn't fully completed until 2012. The island was renamed in honor of the president, and this park sits at the very southern tip of Roosevelt Island. It has excerpts of the Four Freedoms speech and points to the United Nations building, giving a clear view to visitors. As governor, Roosevelt was very influential in New York State, tackling corruption, building retirement initiatives, and further developing the state's hydropower. As the sun slowly fades, we cross to the glamorous streets of the Upper East Side. We find ourselves on the eastern part of Central Park, behind the famed Metropolitan Museum of Art, observing the obelisk named Cleopatra's Needle, artifacts reclaimed from Alexander the Great. We also observe the activities across Central Park.
Along the street of Fifth Avenue is the Museum Mile, a long road that contains the majority of museums in Manhattan, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Guggenheim Museum, one of the most impressive pieces by famed architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Between these museums, they average around 1 million visitors a year.
Get ready to experience the Museum Mile across Fifth Avenue, beginning with its most famous museum, the Met. The entrance is filled with visitors, showcasing just how popular this museum is. It's the largest museum in America and the 5th largest museum in the world, containing more than 2 million artifacts. With its fast-paced environment, the street vendors line up in front of the museum, selling all staples you would expect from a New York trip.
So iconic New York City foods. You have your pizza, you have your bagels, but on almost every other street in Manhattan, there's hot dog.
And this is one of the tastiest hot dogs I've ever had. Nathan's Hot Dog originated in Coney Island in New York City. Up the road is the Cooper Hewitt Design Museum, residing in the former mansion of Andrew Carnegie. It has pieces dating back hundreds of years. And the Jewish Museum is the oldest Jewish museum in the world and the first Jewish museum in America, containing the largest collection of Jewish culture. The Neue Gallery is a museum dedicated to Austrian and German art of the early 20th century. At the old Henry Frick Mansion is the Frick Museum, filled with classic European paintings. and across the Frick Museum is the Richard Hunt Memorial, a prominent architect who helped mold New York City and the mansions of Fifth Avenue. And not to be left out is the uniquely designed Guggenheim Museum. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright during the later years of his career, bringing one of the most astounding designed museums in the city. And while heading back to Central Park, I reflect on the importance of the Museum Mile, such an integral piece to the identity of the neighborhood.
From 62nd all the way to 78th Street is Upper East Side's historic districts, one of the largest landmark districts across all of New York City. It extends from Fifth Avenue to Lexington Avenue, with a history of some of the wealthiest residents to ever live in New York City.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time today, please welcome to the stage the song silence of Mr. Lewis.
At the edge of the neighborhood, where Central Park ends, comes the mayhem of Midtown, colliding with the Upper East Side. At the Grand Army Plaza is a 20-foot statue of Union General William Sherman. I approached the statue, simply amazed at its beauty and details. It's become a metaphor for victory. And right across is another American icon, the Apple Cube. This glass structure has become one of the most photographed stores in New York City. As we explore the neighborhood, we come across a familiar legend.
This is the original Statue of Liberty. The original model, cast by Auguste Bartholdi.
This statue was enlarged 16 times to create the monument at the New York Harbor. The Upper East Side is historic as it contains many townhouses and mansions built at the beginning of the 20th century after the Civil War. It gives that distinctive New York City look we find all across Manhattan.
I mentioned bagels, hot dogs, pizza. So how can I mention pizza and not have some, especially in New York City? On our final adventure, we gotta stop by to get some of the best.
And circling back to the beginning of the neighborhood, we visit Yorkville and Carl Schurz Park, dedicated to German-born American statesman Carl Schurz, who was appointed as Secretary of Interior by President Rutherford Hayes. At the center of the park is a statue of Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. This adventure has truly given me a new, diverse appreciation for the Upper East Side, showcasing a variety of attractions spread across the neighborhood.
So in the Upper East Side, you also find Gracie Mansion. This is the official residence of the mayor of New York City.
So closing in, I take my final walk in Central Park after such an extraordinary journey to soak in all the fascinating history I've learned while visiting Upper Manhattan.
The tour of Upper Manhattan has been such an amazing experience. From the rolling hills of Inwood to the towering George Washington Bridge and Washington Heights, the amazing culture and sounds that came out of Harlem, and the glitzy art side of the Upper West Side. The Upper East Side takes a mix of all those neighborhoods and adds its own spectacular attractions, from the museums to history and the allure of Central Park to the fantastic connection of Roosevelt Island. It lays the foundation to some of New York City's most memorable attractions. I'm Jose, and I thank you for joining me on this amazing adventure in Upper Manhattan. If you like what you see in a day, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and share. If you want to see more in the streets of New York City, please stay tuned for the following video. Until next time. showcasing a little bit of New York Underground. That's the subway right here in Grand Central Terminal. I'm really sorry, guys. Right here in Grand Central Terminal, it's a life of its own, right? I mean, there's art, there's food, there's music. It's the madness of New York City, all underground.